Reese, how many visa overstayers are there in the United States?
Sir, as I said earlier, I don't have that statistic with me.
Well, let's use the President's statistics that there are 11 million and 40% of them would be visa overstayers as opposed to border crossers. Do you take exception with what the President said, or can we just use that as kind of a baseline?
I, in all honesty, don't recall what the President said about it, but I'm not sure where those ctats are coming from.
So you cannot tell me how many visa overstayers are in the United States.
I don't have that information with me.
Is there a list?
There is an interim draft entry-exit report which has overstayed data in it.
No. I want, are there a list of names of visa overstayers?
So anybody who's overstayed, regardless if it's a visa or a visa waiver program, those individuals have final removal orders, and our Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency receives that list.
So there's a list?
Yeah.
Is that list shared with federally licensed firearms dealers?
I am not sure.
Well, it is actually currently against the law for anyone who is here illegally or unlawfully to possess or purchase a firearm. And I understood in Mr. Good's opening he wants to create a new list of prohibited persons, which just struck me that maybe we ought to find out how good a job we're doing with the current statutes that we have. Do you know how many prosecutions that there were for, say, the last 3 years for folks who tried to purchase a firearm that were not here legally?
No, sir, but I can ask ICE that question.
Well, it wouldn't be ICE. It would be the Department of Justice.
Then I wouldn't have that information because I'm with DHS.
Well, and the good news for us is we do have that information, and it's an incredibly small number of prosecutions, like less than 100. So you can understand some of our skepticism when we hear folks calling for a new category of prohibited persons that cannot purchase or possess firearms when we've done such a dreadful job with the current categories. It is currently unlawful, illegal for people who are not legally in the country to purchase or possess firearms. And my question is, how many of those folks have we prosecuted? And the number's really small. Let me ask you another question about the terrorism list. What process is afforded a U.S. citizen, not someone who's overstayed a visa, not someone who crossed the border without permission, but an American citizen, what process is currently afforded an American citizen before they go on that list?
I'm sorry. There's not a process afforded the citizen prior to getting on the list. There is a process should someone feel they are unduly placed on the list.
Yes, there is. And when I say process, I'm actually using half of the term due process, which is a phrase we find in the Constitution, that you cannot deprive people of certain things without due process. So I understand Mr. Good's idea, which is wait until your right has been taken from you and then you can petition the government to get it back. I understand that that's his idea. My question is, can you name another constitutional right that we have that is chilled until you find out it's chilled and then you have to petition the government to get it back? Is that true with the First Amendment?
Sir, there are strict criteria before.
That's not my question, ma'am. That is not my question. My question is, what process is afforded a United States citizen before that person's constitutional right is infringed? Then he's fine with doing it with the Second Amendment. My question is, how about the First? How about we not let them set up a website or a Google account? How about we not let them join the church until they can petition government to get off the list? How about not get a lawyer? How about the Sixth Amendment? How about you can't get a lawyer until you petition the government to get off the list? Or my favorite, how about the Eighth Amendment? We're going to subject you to cruel and unusual punishment until you petition the government to get off the list. Is there another constitutional right that we treat the same way for American citizens that we do the Second Amendment? Can you think of one? Can you think of one?
I don't have an answer for you, sir.
All right. Well, I'm out of time, but I've got a couple other questions, and I'm sure the chairman will indulge me. Do you know whether the female terrorist in California was subjected to an in-person interview before her K visa was issued?
As part of the visa process, yes, that individual was interviewed.
Do you know who interviewed the person?
I do not have that information. That would be a question to ask the State Department.
Do you know how long the interview took place, how long it lasted?
That would also be a question for the State Department. They conducted the interview.
Do you know what investigation, if any, was done into her in terms of education, employment, social media?
Those are all questions that should be referred to the State Department.
Who has her immigration file?
USCIS would have the immigration file.
I thought USCIS was a subset of DHS.
Yes.
And you're with DHS, so why wouldn't I ask you?
So the process would start with CIS for a K-1 visa.
I know, and then it goes to the State Department.
And then it goes to the State Department, which is where all the checks to see if that individual is eligible for the K-1 visa. I'm sorry, I even lost my own train of thought.
No, I know exactly where you're going.
If someone is eligible, sorry, for the K-1
Mr. Rodriguez
visa.
was with us yesterday.
Yes. Then the individual would travel to the United States. Of course, there's vetting done on the individual as they travel, as any individual is. And then within 90 days, they can apply for legal permanent residency. And then that is also when USCIS would get involved and do biographic and biometric checks.
I understand the process, and I'm out of time. I'm just going to make this point before I yield back to the chairman. There's an application process for it. We're not even talking about the visa waiver program. We're talking about the process where there actually is a visa issued. There's an investigation, there's an interview, there's another interview, and yet we still got it wrong. And I would think the chairman, one of whom is sitting beside me, and Chairman DeSantis and Ranking Member Lynch, I would think that they would be very interested in her immigration file to find out what questions perhaps weren't asked that should have been, so we can learn lessons after the 14 are dead, and hopefully we can learn before there are 14 more dead. So I would encourage you to ask your boss to make that file available to both the ranking member of the full committee, the chairman of the full committee, the ranking member of the subcommittee, and the chairman of the subcommittee. And with that, I would yield back to the chairman.
System.
Do most people come into this country on airplane, or do they come in by vehicle and car? Or vehicle, cars, and walking?
I would anticipate it would be air, but I don't know.
Again, you're in charge of this stuff, and so when will you get us that information?
I'm not in charge of the operations, but I am in charge of working on the.
You're in charge of screening. Your title says screening in it. So, if they come in on a visa waiver program by air and depart not by air, what percentage of those people do you capture?
So that is what I would say is one of the gaps that we have acknowledged. If someone comes in by air and leaves by land, yes.
And there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who may have come here legally, but now they're here illegally, correct?
I don't have that number with me, but I
Is it hundreds of thousands of people?
I don't have that number.
The answer is yes, correct? I mean, Mr. Lynch laid it out there for you.
I recognize that I'm under oath, and I just don't want to provide misinformation to you. It is not that I don't want to provide information.
So it's somewhere between hundreds of thousands and potentially the low millions of people that came here legally through the visa waiver program. What were the topic of this? The topic that we're discussing, and just decided they're not going to leave. And you should have a list of those people, right? Do you share any of that info? Who else gets that list? Who do you share that list with?
That list is shared with, I believe, it's shared with interagency partners, and it's shared across, yeah.
Who do you share that list with?
I don't have the list with me.
You're the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Screening Coordination, and in your job description of the one paragraph on the website, you're supposed to be the one that's coordinating with the other departments and agencies. When you have somebody who's a visa overstay, do you consider that a threat to the United States of America?
Sir, sometimes there are people who overstay that are grandmas that come over to take care of their grandchildren. I wouldn't call them a threat. I'm not saying that they shouldn't abide by the terms of their admission period, but calling them a threat is a totally different, circumstance.
So you just assume that everybody that comes here on this visa waiver program is not a threat?
I didn't say that either. Anybody who comes and overstays their period of admission here receives that final removal order, and we go after them and prioritize them based on national security and public safety first.
When do they get
resources that we have?
When do they get that removal order?
I mean, if you're here for VWP and it's 90 days, and on the 91st day, you're considered to be an overstay.
You said they give them a removal order. Who gives them the removal order?
The removal order would come from ICE.
And how many
check on the time frame, but
and will you also give us a list of how many of those have been sent out? When you have somebody who has then overstayed their visa, come here on the visa waiver program, which law enforcement entities do you share that with? Which databases does that go into? Can you name one?
So we will have within DHS the who has the final removal orders. I believe it's shared with state and local, but I don't want to say that with certainty right now. So, I will do my very best to get you the information that the department has on those questions.
Yeah, who is the specific person that would know? You report to, sorry, you told me earlier, the person you report to is?
Assistant Secretary Seth Stoddard. I'm in the Office of Policy.
And that person reports to?
Assistant Secretary Alan Burson.
And that person reports to?
Secretary of Homeland Security.
Jay Johnson.
Yes, sir.
The request we sent was for Jay Johnson, and Jay Johnson sent you as the expert on these topics. So, this is why I think we need help on both sides of the aisle here, but Mr. Johnson, the Secretary himself, has got to come answer these questions. You strike me as a very nice person, but these are basic questions about the functionality here, and when we're having a congressional hearing, it is a waste of this committee's time to send somebody who doesn't know the answers to very basic questions. And that's why we will continue to pursue